Hi friends, it's Brad Rogers, pastor at First Church in Bonita Springs. Welcome to another episode of Dialogues for the Life Academy. Many of the most influential individuals I have known over the years concern themselves not only with the influence they have while they are living, but the legacy they leave when God calls them home. Today we are going to focus upon the topic of leaving a legacy of faith with our children and grandchildren. If you're watching this video, someone close to you shared the hope that they've found in Christ with you. Most likely, it was a trusted family member like a parent or a grandparent. Our parents and grandparents were able to do this in our homes while being surrounded by a culture that supported similar values. Throughout the last century, the West has transitioned from being a culture where Christianity and Christian values were pillars that supported the American way of life to a culture where Christianity is being relegated more and more to the margins, where its influence seems to be waning. This shift has been broad and expansive, observable in entertainment and politics and education, but it's deeply personal as well, felt even in our own homes. As a pastor, I've heard many lament that their kids or their grandkids have left the faith and Christian values behind despite being raised in a Christian home. However, it's my conviction that the Christian scriptures reveal God's intention for parents and grandparents to leave that faith legacy behind, to pass the baton of faith from one generation to the next. The book of Deuteronomy reads, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of our houses and on your gates." So joining me today in Studio One is Dr. Bob Petterson, the co-founder and president of Legacy Imperative. Dr. Petterson has had many years of pastoral experience serving churches around the country, and he's a gifted communicator, a speaker, a storyteller, and he's got vast other experiences as well. He's served locally here in Southwest Florida, most recently at Covenant Church in Naples. Dr. Petterson, welcome to Studio One and this episode of the Life Academy.
It's good to be here.
You have had a distinguished pastoral career serving all over the place. Tell us a little bit more about your career than I've already shared.
Well, I've not only been a pastor, I taught for a few years at Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis, so I'm an educator. I've also was the president of Master Media International, the largest Christian ministry to film and television executives. So I love culture. I'm a cultural savant. I love what's going on in Hollywood, what's going on around the world. I think the greatest storytellers in the world today are our own American media. And I also think Satan owns that media. And so not only are they the greatest storytellers, but they're changing the culture. It was my own mentor, Francis Schaeffer, who said that, that the arts not only reflect culture, but they change culture.
That's true. That's true. So after your career as a pastor in your retirement years, you have co-founded a ministry called the Legacy Imperative. Tell us a little bit about the vision behind that. Where did that come from?
Well, first of all, when I came to Naples, we built a great church here. The Holy Spirit working through us built a great church here based primarily on older people. There's a saying here in Naples, I thought I was old, I thought I was rich. I came to Naples and found out I was neither. And so we began to work with a church, a small church, mostly older people, and saw it grow to be a mega church with a great mission program. And we did it all with older people. And I kept saying to them all through the years, it's not time to retire, it's time to refire. If youth being wasted on the young is sad, age being wasted on the old is a tragedy. And so when I turned my ministry over to a young man that I had been preparing, Dr. Trent Casto, to take my place, I thought I was going to go write and spend time with my grandkids. And then I remembered that statement. It's not time to retire, it's time to refire. And I went away for 2 weeks, got snowed in on the Atlantic coast, trying to write a book. And I began to think about my own grandkids. I began to look at what was going on in the world they were living in today. And I began to see the statistics, and it scared me to death. If you were to take all the people under 40 years of age in America, they add up to 166 million people today. That would be the 8th largest nation in the world if separated out. These people under the age of 40, I would think if we were going to give the most optimistic number possibly, about 152 million don't know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. 1 out of 5 high school kids has never been to church in their lifetime. 15% of teenagers today self-identify as atheist. And about 20% self-identify as agnostics, and the rest have a kind of shrug your shoulders view of God. 64% of our kids in church end up dropping out of church when they go to college. And only 11% of the attendants in evangelical churches are under the age of 30. All those statistics give a kind of an imperative to what we call legacy imperative. And I began to think about that. I began to get depressed about that. I saw a statistic that changed everything. When asked, who are your favorite people in the world? People that are millennials and Gen Zs say, 83% say, our grandparents. They love their grandparents. Right. And then I saw a statistic that, conservatively at least, 20 million people in America who are of the grandparent age identify as evangelical Christians. So I thought if you could motivate and mobilize grandparents to reach the next generation, you could change our culture, you could change our world, you could change the lives of the next generation.
So you began the Legacy Imperative.
I did.
I had the opportunity to take a look at your book, The Legacy
Yes.
Imperative, which outlines so much of what you've shared for us. Tell me a little bit about how the Legacy Imperative goes about the mission.
Well, our strategy is to reach 10 million people. But we believe it can only be done through the church. The church is what Jesus instituted. The church is what he uses to reach the nations through the Great Commission. We believe that passionately. So we believe God will honor ministry through the church. So we want to get into 2,500 churches across America to reach 10 million people, to let them hear the message through our weekend Next Generation Summits. We're calling people to action. We're calling grandparents to give the 4th quarter of their life, the best quarter of their life, the last quarter of their life to something significant. And that's to make sure that the next generation loved ones in their life cross over to heaven with them. And so that's where we start. And then we're finding about 48% of those people in every church that we've gone to so far say, we want to go to the next step. So we have basic training for those that are ready to enter the spiritual battle for the lives of their kids. And so we have 8 sessions that we do weekly through small groups, in the church small groups, where they learn what we think are the most important basics for reaching your young people for Jesus, and listening to them, talking to them, asking questions, all those things. And then for those who want to go a step further, we have sustaining groups where they stay in this thing for the rest of their life. We give them a certificate, missionary to what we call digital land. And so that's the rest of their life is committed to that. They pray together, they study scriptures together. We have all the curriculum. We have all the curriculum for everything on our websites. And it's an exciting program. And then the second thing we're trying to do is to build a toolbox of fact sheets, of film clips, to teach grandparents how to talk to this other generation. We have 6 generations that occupy the same landscape in America today. They all speak with a different tribal language. They all have different life experiences. They all have a different worldview. So what we're trying to do is teach people how to talk to their young people, to their grandchildren, their children, about the issues that are polarizing America today, issues on gender, on sexuality, on abortion, on so many different issues that are dividing the generations. And what we're trying to do is to build bridges to those generations so that we can bring the generations together to have meaningful conversations that will lead them to an understanding of the great life that Jesus Christ offers us today.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, we live in a really interesting time where one of the number one mission fields and the most important mission field for us is right here in America among our young people. And so your organization is really catalyzing those who have what I've called the warmth and wisdom of life experience and Christian formation to nurture the next generations. That's beautiful. So you've had the opportunity to travel based on the legacy imperative to different churches around the country. What are you hearing from pastors and parishioners about the greatest challenges that they're facing?
Well, from parishioners, grandparents and parents, we're hearing from people that don't know how to talk to their grandkids. They don't understand their grandkids, their kids. We're hearing people saying, my grandchild just came out as an LGBTQIA plus person, and I don't know how to talk to her about that. And I heard a grandmother the other day say, my granddaughter told me if I didn't affirm her choices regarding her sexuality, that she was going to cancel her, not have anything to do with her. How do we deal with that? How do I share my values and understand my grandkids and affirm my grandkids without affirming their choices, without losing my own moral basis? So we're hearing a lot of that from grandparents. I don't know how to take the Bible and apply it to the great issues of today. And the second, what I'm hearing from pastors is a frustration that statistically 60% of the attendance of evangelical churches are people over the age of 50. Less than 11% are under the age of 30. Pastors are frustrated because they're losing the young people, and they're sometimes looking at the older people in their church as a liability. And what we're trying to say to the past, and there was an experiment that started when I came out of seminary in the 70s, an experiment that American churches, based on how America had looked at its own evangelism for the last 300 years in a largely Christian culture, and that is if we get people inside the church, preach the gospel to them, then we will change them. If we have a revival once a year in the church, they'll come to the meetings. Or even if we have a tent out there outside the church, they'll come and they'll hear the gospel. We tried to apply that to the fact we were losing young people starting in the 70s. We thought if we could make the church attractive to young people by changing the music, by changing the technology, by changing even our doctrines, the way we approach the gospel with the young people, that we would attract them to come back to the church. Well, the experiment hasn't worked, right? The statistics today show that we are losing young people today 3 times faster than we did back in the 70s. And our churches are emptying of young people. And so pastors don't know what to do about that. And what we're telling pastors, and what we're excited about, is look again at this vast, wonderful, powerful group of older people you have in your church who have learned life lessons for the first three quarters of their life. They've gained resources. They have time, maybe not as much energy, but they have time and resources and wisdom. And most importantly, they are loved more than anybody else by their grandkids, and begin to train and equip them to what Jesus called us to do, and that was not to go into the churches, but to go into the world and to train them to take their faith, equip them in the faith as what every church should do for their believers, and then send them out trained and equipped to reach the young people who aren't going to return to church. I can tell you this, Brad, 83% of young people say they love their grandparents more than anybody else. They don't say they love their pastor more than anybody else. And they may not come home to church. They may not come to church at Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, all those times we used to see young people come into the church at least once or twice a year, but they will go to their grandparents' house, their parents' house. They will go there. And so we are calling people, and we're calling pastors to change their whole paradigm and use the most powerful force they have in the church, grandparents and older parents, to go out the way Jesus taught them and reach people where they are.
And in a world today which has communicated that, unfortunately, to some of our older generations, that they don't have anything to offer, what we're saying is, actually, they've got more to offer than they may realize, and we need them to be a primary conduit for God's gospel today, which is a beautiful thing.
Well, you asked me earlier about my retirement years, and I can just tell you this, that I know 2 things that are true for me. 1, it is appointed unto a man once to die. I am going to die. And 2, to then face their Creator. And I'm going to face God. And I know God's going to hold me accountable. And I've come to the conclusion that, taking the verse, to whom much has been given, much will be required, that my fourth quarter is my best quarter. If you study football games, you'll know that most football games are won or lost in the fourth quarter. And I want to use the fourth quarter, and I know I'm going to be held accountable for the fourth quarter. It's the best quarter of my life. I get up every morning with a spring in my step as a 75-year-old guy, and I am still about taking my legacy, my faith legacy, to the next generation.
Well, you mentioned that your desire is to equip the generations to speak one to another. You have a partnership with Big Life Ministries,
Yes.
which has helped you with an apologetic model. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Big Life has a three-circle model for sharing the gospel, which is very powerful. They've used it all over the world. I was with them recently this summer in northern Kenya among the Turkana people. And they take this gospel presentation and they apply it to the language, to the experiences of people in Turkana land. They take that same three-circle gospel presentation to Nepal, to India, to Muslim countries, and it's totally different. It's to each group. So we came to Big Life, we said, we like your three-circle idea. Would you help us to take this and apply it in the language and the thought patterns of American millennials and Gen Z people? And so they helped us, and you saw it in our book, a three-circle presentation that speaks to the number one issue that young people are asking today. If there is a good God who is in charge of this world, why is the world so messed up? More importantly, why is my life so messed up personally? And that's what this presentation does. We're so grateful to Big Life for helping us with this model we use.
We had a conversation before we started recording today about how apologetics really serves two purposes, one for the Christian and one for those outside the church. Tell us a little bit about your philosophy on that.
Well, my philosophy is we have to look at apologetics two different ways. When Peter says, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that lies within you to those who ask. I think apologetics, first and foremost, is for the Christian. And I would just say this, that before we can really go across the bridge to those who aren't Christians, we better be sure of our own faith foundations. It's very important because it's so easy in this world to want to be liked by other people, to want to identify with them, to want to show compassion toward them, that sometimes as we begin to listen to them, maybe it's a gay grandchild or a transgender person or somebody has a different view about life and choices with our body and whatever, our tendency is to let them determine how we believe, and they begin to chip away at our foundation. So I love what Mike Bossman is doing for you guys and talking about how to understand truth and who God is and the foundations of why the Bible has authority. Because if we roll over on these issues, the world is lost. If the light goes out of the church, then it's going to be the outer darkness of hell in the world. And so I love that. And I think that's the job of the church. But I think the church has another job too. And that's to teach us to do apologetics where we start with where the non-believer is. And our kids are at a different place when it comes to truth, when it comes to God, when it comes to almost every issue that we learn and the faith passed from our grandparents. So when we want to pass our faith on to our grandkids, we're going to start with where they are. And that's what Legacy Imperatives is really committed to, is how we talk to our kids with the issues they are facing and then work back to the basics that we believe.
Maintaining the truth that we've come to know and love that has saved us, and also understanding where people are at. So tell us a little bit about where people are at in a postmodern culture.
Well, I think where people are at in a postmodern culture is that, in a pre-modern culture, we had a metaphysical view of truth, that truth was revealed from heaven. It was written down in the holy books, whether it was the Jewish Torah or the Christian Bible or the Muslim Quran, but we understood truth as revealed from God. Then in the modern age, truth became scientific. It was what we didn't need God so much, we could determine truth ourselves by observing the world, the Socrates idea that the truth is in nature, that experimentation, data, evaluating the data, we could come to an understanding of truth, the scientific methodology. We live now in the postmodern age where truth doesn't come from above. It doesn't come from outside of me. Truth comes from within me. I am the arbiter of truth. I decided what's true for myself. If I die today, truth doesn't exist. And I think we've even gone a step further in our computer age, our internet, digital age, in which truth now is by click. How many algorithms, how many followers, how many likes. It's the big companies like Google and Facebook that become the arbiters of truth and dispense the information on which people determine what the truth is. And so everything has changed today. Take gender, for instance. In a pre-science age, in a pre-modern age, God told us, this is how I've determined creation to be. In a scientific age, we looked at the DNA, we looked at chromosomes, we looked at all the evidence and said, this is a man, this is a woman. In a postmodern age, now we don't listen to what God says. We don't even listen to what science says. I determine now from within myself what I am, whether I'm a male or a female. This is one example of how truth has changed. And if I go on in the digital world, I'll find the algorithms, the comments of people on Twitter and every place else are confirming what my view of truth is, and that is whatever I want it to be, whatever makes me feel good, whatever satisfies me is the truth. And if you disagree with my view of truth, then you are phobic in some way, or you're a hater in some way. And so that's where things have really changed.
So we have a number of different generations, 6 different generations that exist in America today, and we're primarily in the church dealing with older generations and trying to empower them then to communicate the gospel to their kids and their grandkids. Technology has changed the game in that way. Tell us how we can leverage technology to communicate the gospel to our kids and grandkids.
Well, it's interesting because you could argue that the Roman roads spread Roman tyranny, the Roman troops that conquered nations. Or you could argue the Roman roads became the means by which missionaries took the gospel to the world. And I think we have to look at technology in the same way. It can either be the devil's tool or it can be a tool we use for Christ. And so with all the problems technology has with media consumption, with the way it shapes truth in a way that's unchristian and unbiblical, we still ought to use it, particularly in an age when grandparents no longer live in the same time with their children for the most part. So I use technology with my grandkids who live in Washington, D.C. We're on Zoom at least once or twice a week. I record messages on my cell phone and send it to them, just short little messages. With kids in our age, they have about the attention span of 8 seconds. So they have to be 2 lines at most with a meme or a jiffy or some kind of a little film clip. And so I'm trying to learn how to do Instagram, how to do TikTok, because my grandkids are into all of that. And so I think that we have the means now that we can face-to-face connect with our kids, which is wonderful.
That's right. It's amazing to think about. So the majority of the people who season with us here in Southwest Florida are probably separated from their families by thousands of miles. And now their grandkids probably have this little glowing box that grandparents will have access to. If they can just leverage the technology on this end, they can be right next to their kids digitally and continue that relationship with them. What are some really practical things that grandparents can do to nurture that relationship with their grandkids such that it can be a vehicle for the communication of the gospel?
You're talking about social media or just in our relationship in general?
Just in our relationship in general.
Well, I think that we talked about this before, and I think the number one thing that I would say to grandparents, the number one thing we teach in our mission training groups, and people say afterwards, boy, it was the best thing I ever learned, that's how to listen. We lecture more than we listen. I will never understand my kids, my grandkids, or even other people my own age if I don't listen to them. And not just with my ears, but with my eyes. to listen with my heart, to listen to their heart, what's behind their words, to listen carefully. Often we listen only to wait for an opportunity to get a word in edgewise. And so I have to wash that out of my computer, my hardwiring, and I have to say, okay, I'm going to let you download. I'm going to let you download on me, and I'm going to listen. Even if you say things that are shocking, and by the way, that's an important part for grandparents when we listen, is not to be shockable. And the reason they'll come to us instead of their children or their parents is because the parents are their coaches. They don't want to disappoint their parents, and they know they're going to get a lecture from their parents. The parents' whole identity is tied up in their success and how they think, but they'll come to the grandparents because we've been their cheerleaders. And so if you've loved them since they were little children, and have loved them unconditionally, and have loved them passionately, then they will talk to you, where they won't talk to their parents, but you got to listen. The second thing that you need to do is ask questions. Our tendency is to say, why do you think that way? Why do your friends think that way? Why are you guys doing this or that? Rather to say, how does that make you feel? What are you thinking about that? How's that working out for you? How's it working out for your friends? Where do you think that's going to lead you? But ask in a way not to use your questions to trap them, but to use your questions to really understand what their thought process is, because you'll have to know that later on if you ever get a chance to begin to share with them how you feel. And so that's the second thing. The third thing I would say that's so important when you're listening and talking to your kids is you don't have to close the deal today. We always say in our summits, there are three persons of the Trinity, and you're not one of them. Especially you're not the Holy Spirit. It's not your job to close the deal. It's the Holy Spirit's job to close the deal. And He may want to close the deal today, or it may be 5 years from today, or it may not be you that closes the deal. It may be somebody else. So not only does the Holy Spirit in charge of your loved one's life, and cares more about their eternity than you ever could, but also He may choose to use you to sow a seed or to water or to weed, but He may not use you to be the one to harvest the soul. And so I think it's really important that we really relax. It's in God's hands. And I think that's really important. I think the other thing is really important also when you're talking to your kids is to stand and know where you stand on any issue. Because I find this, that people who are unsure about how they feel are much more, they get much more upset when people don't agree with them. They get more defensive, they get more polemical, they get more polarized. If I'm confident in what I believe, the whole world can disagree with me and I can relax. I don't have to attack them. And that means also that when I'm talking to my kids, I got to put ego out of the way. It's not me being right. And they can spot, our kids have a BS meter. They can spot that a mile away. And then I guess the final thing that I would say is love your kids. Not only listen to them, but love them. And the love begins when they're little. My grandkids are 8 and 5. I'm still at the point where I'm a geriatric rock star to them. They love me and I love them, and they know I love them unconditionally. And it's that love I have now that is going to come back to play later on. If one of them wanders off into the far country and the far country does its work and dismantles their life, and they need to come somewhere where they're loved, they'll be like that young man in that parable Jesus told. They'll come to their senses and say, I know a house where I can be loved because I've been loved there before, and they'll come back.
If you've demonstrated over the years the capacity to listen to them, to not be shocked by what they have to say,
yes,
they're probably more likely to come to you as a grandparent than they would be to go to their parents, right?
So already my 5-year-old, in this culture she lives in, is saying things that could be shockable.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what she's going to say at 13 and 14 and 15. So I'm preparing myself to not be shocked at anything she says.
Wow. That's powerful. Well, you've shared with us 5 things that grandparents can do to develop that relationship with their grandkids. What should we avoid?
Avoid at all cost making judgmental statements about the culture in which your kids are at, their friends, what they think. My daughter used to come home from, my daughter is a lawyer in D.C., works for the Department of Homeland Security, teaches at GW Law School. But when she comes home, she wanted to watch what I call trash TV. And she would lie there watching, I wouldn't know about the Shahs of Sunset, Below Deck Mediterranean, Grizzly Knows Best, or the Housewives of whatever, if she hadn't come home to watch those shows. And my wife would watch with her. And my wife would begin to make editorial comments about the words they said, their actions, and I would begin to count down. 9, 8, 7, 5, 4, and invariably my daughter would explode. And my wife would be in the other room weeping. And I would say to Joyce, I'd go in and Joyce would say, what happened to her? We trained her. We brought her up in the ways of the Lord, and now she's liking that stuff. And I said, she's not necessarily liking that stuff. She's finding it entertaining. She doesn't necessarily agree with everything, but what she's having a problem with is your judgmental attitude. Because if she had the courage to tell you the truth, she would say, I've watched you and your Christian friends. I see all your hypocrisies, all your inconsistencies. Who are you to judge these people? And I can tell you, there's no greater thing to avoid than making judgmental comments, particularly as a grandparent. Now, maybe the parents can because they're the coaches. Their job is not to be the friend of their kids or to be liked by their kids, but to raise them up to walk in a world. But for grandparents, our job is to be the cheerleader.
Those kids and grandkids who have grown up in a postmodern culture, the cardinal sin for the postmodern culture is what is perceived as intolerance.
Intolerance and exclusive thinking without being inclusive. And let me the thing I would also say that every grandparent has to remember, we cannot talk to our grandchildren and deal with our grandchildren in the same way that our grandparents talked and dealt with us. And it's really important to understand this is a different world. There have been dizzying changes. Everything has changed. And so what we have to do is learn how our children think and accommodate or not accommodate to the way they think, or not go along with the lifestyle choices that maybe they're making that we know are unbiblical. But to understand, as Paul said, I become all things to all men that I might win some to Christ. And we have to understand how our culture thinks. If we don't, we're doomed if we want to make a difference in the lives of our kids.
So we can't let the light go out in the church. We got to stand on the truths that we know, and also the way in which we present it can never appear judgmental or we lose the fight.
We do. And I think we can affirm our people without affirming their choices or their lifestyles. And I think Jesus didn't affirm the lifestyles of the tax collectors and the prostitutes that he ate with. These guys were gangsters. And they were immoral people. Jesus never laughed at their jokes. He didn't approve of their lifestyle. But somehow they knew that he loved them. And he didn't judge them the way the Pharisees did. So I tell Christians everywhere, if your non-believing friends are turned off by you, if it's because of what you believe, that's okay. But if it's because of the way you are and the way you present yourself, you might ask yourself, am I coming across like Jesus, or am I coming across like a Pharisee?
That's powerful. Well, I see you holding a book there. Do you want to share anything about that book?
Well, I would just love to give a quick commercial for Legacy Imperative and legacyimperative.org. They can go there and they can find all of our materials. And this book is our primary book, Reaching the Legacy Imperative, Reaching Digital Land. That's the place we call where our kids who are digital natives live. And so we have a lot of stuff there they can look at. We also have on YouTube, we have a series called, on our YouTube channel, Legacy Imperative YouTube channel, we have a series called Hot Button Issues. where we deal with a lot of these hot button issues, LGBTQ, other issues that people are wrestling with today. So they can go there and find that. So I'm just holding this here just to remind everybody there's a place they can go to grow deeper and become expert, or at least somewhat competent. I don't think any of us become expert, because the moment we figure it out, our culture is moving at such a quick pace, it changes. So one of our commitments at Legacy Imperative is always to stay on the cutting edge of the trends as they change.
Well, I had the opportunity to read this book. It was fascinating. It was well written. It was whimsical. It was so many great things, and so I would also commend it to our people.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today as we've had this conversation with Dr. Bob Petterson. We hope and pray that you have learned from it, that you have gotten a lot out of it, and that you've got some resources now to take a look at. You may also want to take a look at some of the videos that Michael Bosman has been recording about apologetics, because again, apologetics help us not only as Christians understand our faith, but they also enable us to communicate our faith with confidence to other folks. And I hope and pray that you have been empowered by this conversation today to see yourself in a new light today. If you're in the fourth quarter of life, you are at the most nimble place in your life to draw from all the experiences that you've had in order to leverage those to communicate the gospel to the people who love you the most, your grandkids, and we hope and pray that you will see that as a part of your calling. It's like it says in the scriptures, "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." That's our hope and prayer for you. Thanks again for joining us.
Amen.